From the first ever Scream movie that etched Ghostface's terrifying image in our heads forever, to the franchise testing its horror limits to this day, here's how the legacy of Scream changed the horror genre forever. I mean, when it came out in December 1996, Scream changed the game with its smart and interesting postmodern perspective. At first, critics didn't get it, but this didn't matter because the public did, and they made it the first big horror box office win in years. Without it, horror wouldn't be what it is today. At the beginning of the 1990s, horror was in a bad place. The 80s, on the other hand, were a great time for movies because the slasher subgenre was so popular. But when studios kept making bad sequels to movies like Halloween, Friday the 13th, and A Nightmare on Elm Street, the audience understandably got tired of them. Then, scary movies lost money at the box office, so studios stopped making them. You see, the world needed a big change, and Scream gave it to them. The film was not only a wake-up call to the industry, telling them that they need new creative energy in the field, but the way they did it at the box office was a clear sign that people wanted things to change. It was an unusual movie that came out around the holidays in 1996, and while its first weekend wasn't great, it shocked the movie industry by doing better on the second weekend, and then even better on the third one.
Those are the rules.
Just pretend it's all a scary movie, say. How do you think it's gonna end?
Oh, this is the greatest part. You're gonna love this. We got a surprise for you, Sydney.
By the time it left theaters around the Memorial Day holiday in May 1997, it had made $103 million domestically and was the highest-grossing horror movie of all time. In fact, people love the specific flavor Scream came up with so much that the movies basically created a genre of their own. Now, horror is in a new golden age right now, with movies like Get Out and Hereditary being called masterpieces of the genre.
At the end.
I don't like this. Dad, I don't like this.
What's happening? Never raise your voice at me. I am your mother.
Since so many of these smart horror movies have changed the way people talk about them, it's important to remember how important Scream was to the development of the genre. Scream is a great example of 90s horror, with its overage teenagers, trope-filled plots, and fun-to-watch over-the-top deaths. But it also completely changed the way trope-filled scary movies are made. For the better, of course. Since then, so many horror movies have used Scream's self-aware horror comedy style as a model. It's important to remember all of this kinda comes from a single place at the end of the day. Without Wes Craven's hit meta franchise, we wouldn't have movies like The Cabin in the Woods, or even Promising Young Woman in 2020. Okay, I know I just keep talking about Scream being an iconic and game-changing movie, but to be more precise, the real reason it was the start of something new was because it used horror movie tropes in a smart way. From the year 2023, this may seem like a boring observation, but back in 1996, the way Scream used other horror movies to move its own plot was unusual. I mean, people often act as if the characters in horror movies have never seen one. And even though the genre is normally very self-aware, that self-awareness is usually between the filmmaker and the audience, not on screen. So because the characters don't know what a horror movie is, they make choices that we audiences find to be very stupid or naive. Hey, I know you've also sat on your couch and judged the characters in a horror movie for their crazy decisions at some point. Don't lie, I'm guilty too. Well, Wes Craven tried to explore this idea before in his clever, very meta 1994 movie, New Nightmare, but it didn't quite work. Though in 1994, Craven's idea might have been a little too new. After all, being John Malkovich's celebrity navel-gazing was still 5 years away, so the attempt to bring back the Nightmare franchise bombed at the box office. Even so, critics thought it was interesting. This was the time that Roger Ebert wrote something along the lines of it being the first horror movie that is really about the question, don't you ever think about how your movies affect the people who watch them? Maybe Craven realized that he had the right idea with New Nightmare, but didn't do a good job of carrying it out. With Scream, he took a step back into the world of pure fiction, but he still looked at the effect of horror movies as a whole in a way that let the audience use what they knew about the genre to understand what they were seeing. The first time we ever saw something like this was literally in the first scene of Scream.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers? characters?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
So, you got a boyfriend?
Why? You want to ask me out on a date?
If you need a reminder or haven't seen the movie yet, in the first 12 minutes of the movie, a teen who is home alone is getting ready to watch TV, and this is when someone calls. At first, she thinks it's a wrong number, but when the caller calls back, she knows it's not. He starts a friendly conversation with her and asks her about her favorite scary movie. She tells him it's Halloween as she caresses a big carving knife, like the one Michael Myers used in the famous 1978 slasher movie. The caller acts friendly at first, but then he asked her for her name and says, "I want to know who I'm looking at." From there, the caller scares her by making it clear he's watching the house, and then starts gutting her boyfriend right in front of her eyes, but not before making her play a macabre game of guess the horror movie. In the end, the killer drives her out of the house and kills her in a brutal way on her front lawn. The whole scene is exciting and scary, but that's not the only reason why so many of us loved it. We liked it because it made references to other horror movies. I mean, this was important because it was the first horror movie that made lots of references to other horror movies. Sounds confusing, but you get what I mean. Not only did Scream make fun of itself by having characters who know about horror movies, but it also broke a major horror trope right away. The thing that makes the first scene of Scream so memorable is that it's not supposed to happen, and yet it does. And this was the single most thrilling thing that caught people's attention at the time. And this entire aspect wasn't just limited to the beginning scene of the movie, but Kevin Williamson's script for the movie picks apart well-known horror tropes at every turn. Even as one character talks about the rules of surviving a horror movie, Scream breaks each one as it goes. Often the characters poke fun at the rules as they're broken. Roger Ebert said in 1996, "Scream takes apart itself. Instead of letting the audience figure out the horror cliches on their own, the characters talk openly about them. By making the characters part of a smart horror audience, Scream gave horror movies a new procedural dimension that wasn't just about meta-references and tongue-in-cheek satire. Scream opened the door for a lot of genre-savvy movies too, like Final Destination, Shaun of the Dead, and Cabin in the Woods. Each one looked at the idea that you can know what kind of story you're in and not only be aware of the tropes, but also use your knowledge of them to control the situation and stay alive. Also, this brings me to something else that movies like these work on. For the narrative tension to work, the audience needs to know a lot about the genre. Not only did it make the audience become more aware of the genre, but it made these movies seem like horror trivia for us too, where we could guess and predict what could happen at the end of the movie, along with the characters. And that's all for the legacy of Scream and how it changed the horror genre forever.